Hello everyone, welcome to our first online class. We are going to be looking at some music over the next 5 or 6 weeks that could be described as character pieces, and these pieces really focus on one kind of mood or sentiment or some kind of emotional one dimension that it goes in a number of different forms, but they're primarily based upon vocal music. And so the forms of these pieces tend to be ABA, just like so many songs do. There are a number of composers in the 19th century who wrote character pieces, and some of them are in the form of dances, some of them are called preludes, some are called impromptu, some are in cycles of songs, and some are independent pieces. So there's a wide variety of things that happen. One of the reasons I wanted to pick the character piece as a kind of project for us for the end of the semester is because it has so many of the harmonic elements that we've talked about in the first part of the semester. So what I thought I would do for the next classes for the rest of the semester is I would be picking pieces of different composers and different types of approaches to the character piece, and then I hope that you will be able to take something from this, maybe steal something from one of the composers or one of the pieces that you hear, and use it in your own way. I wanted to start with something that was very clear-cut in terms of phrasing, and that is a mazurka by Frédéric Chopin. Now, Chopin is principally a piano composer. He wrote a few pieces for other instruments, but he deliberately wrote piano music almost exclusively. And so we have here a dance that's in 3, and it's I like these pieces because they're very eccentric and they have a lot of very unusual features, but they, as I said earlier, they do contain things like augmented sixth chords and Neapolitans and all the things that we've been talking about in relationship to chromatic harmony. Now, once we're finished with this, I would like to point out a few things that might be helpful to you in preparing your project. I think a good start for us for next week, for instance, would be to have at least an 8-measure phrase. Perhaps you could even write one that's like this. The first part of this piece starts with 16 measures, and it's 2 8-bar phrases. The first 8-bar phrase ends on the dominant, and this could be described as a double period as a result. So we have 8 measures, and then the next 8 are very similar to the first 8, except there's no modulation to speak of. There's a little bit of an indication of the E minor. It starts in A minor and ends in A minor, but the piece has elements of a little bit of E minor, and also too, before the end of the first 16 measures, you'll hear a preparation of the Neapolitan. You'll hear 5/7, in fact, of Neapolitan in root position, and then it goes to its characteristic resolution. Now, there's a lot of unusual features about this piece, and I prefer, in many ways, to look at actual pieces rather than look at some kind of figured bass example or some sort of more abstract kind of configuration. So why don't I play through this as I would in a typical class, and then I can point out a few things about it afterwards, and then perhaps it will get you interested in asking questions about how you might write something that's like this. You don't have to write a dance, but if you're going to write a dance, it probably should have the kinds of thematic integrity and the sort of great voice leading in the accompaniment that typically happens in a Chopin piece. So this is very lively, and yet it's in a minor key, and so it has lots of twists and turns. The middle section does go into the parallel major with virtually no warning, and also you kind of come back in a very interesting way to the beginning of the piece. The piece does not really begin on the tonic, so that's a kind of an odd thing, but you do see it very much in romantic music, so you sort of discover the tonic as you go along. As it turns out, the tonic major, in this case A major, is the dominant of D minor, and the piece actually starts with a D minor chord. So that's an interesting kind of way of linking one part of the piece to another. So when you're writing your own piece, you can write it in various sections like this, and you don't have to worry about various kinds of segues from one place to another. Now there's some very sophisticated things that are happening in the accompaniment and also in the voice leading, and you don't have to copy the piece or copy the style, but I think that the best thing that you could do is to sort of notice how these melodies are written, because Chopin is really famous for having written melodies that are very vocal and that have a sound that's somewhat like the bel canto spirit of the operas of Bellini, even though Chopin does not write operas. His music is often thought of as being extremely lyrical, and you can see almost all of it is focused, the foreground is focused in the treble clef. So let me play through this, and then we can talk about a few things that then you can take home. And if you need to, you can listen to this video again, and perhaps that will help clarify some things for you, so that when you get to write your own piece, then it'll be much clearer for you. Okay, so here's the Chopin Maurka. This is Opus 7, number 2. Chopin lives roughly 1810, 1849. So he wrote these pieces around, he wrote a lot of the music very early, fortunately, because he didn't live very long, right? So he lives to be 39, and so many of these pieces were written in his 20s. So perhaps this is something you can identify with too. So here's the Chopin Maurka in A minor, Opus 7, number 2. just something sort of like that. Hope you didn't lose you during that moment of transition. But here the Chopin goes a little bit like you just heard it, and I'd like to focus for the time being just on the first 16 measures, really. And I would suggest to you that when you're writing your own piece, that you begin very much, I'm sure, the way that Chopin was beginning himself. Instead of just sitting down and writing everything from the beginning, write out a melody, right? Listen to this one. First 8 measures ends on scale degree 5, and there's going to be more. And ending on scale degree 1. Now, along the way, there are a number of instances of chromaticism. But there's no actual modulation that occurs in this first 16 measures. We have mainly 4-5-1 or some kind of combination of 4 to 1 to 5 to 1. But around measure 6, you see there's a change. It almost suggests that it goes to E minor, which is a little odd for a piece that's in A minor. Like 1-6-4. Then E major, right? Almost like a sort of Picardy third ending to an E minor piece. That's pretty straightforward. You might be interested too to see that some of the details that are here, like the word stretto, actually means speeding up. And so there's a kind of improvisational aspect to this, even though you have to keep the rhythm of 3 there to make sure it sounds like a dance. There is a bit of speeding up and slowing down that's expected. Part of this has to do with the fact that the phrasing is so symmetrical. Everything is 4-bar phrases. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that 4-bar phrase sounds like an antecedent, and it does end on the tonic, but the soprano was on scale degree 3. Then we go on to almost sounds like 5-5 there at the end, with a slight emphasis on E minor. Some of these pieces have modal elements in them, and the fact that this has an E minor part to it does sound a little bit modal. After all, we're talking about a Polish composer who primarily lived in Paris, but his earliest pieces and earliest beginnings have to do really with Polish folk music, and this mazurka is a kind of popular dance of the time. But you can tell from it that there's something very sort of lively about it, and it does focus on one kind of thing, one kind of content, one kind of emotional statement, one kind of mood, one kind of sentiment of some sort. Now, in the second phrase, we also have an 8-bar phrase, but it has a kind of very surprising thing that happens. That is, the piece almost sounds like it's going to stop. Here, you slow down, there's a pause. Where's it going? And it ends with a kind of smile or a kind of laugh at the end, right? So there's something very charming about this, and it's designed to be sort of amusing. It does get your attention the way that you move here through the Neapolitan. And it's beautifully prepared by having 5/7 of Neapolitan right before the fermato. Here, what happens? Right? So this is an interesting element, and it's fun, and there's no reason why your piece, even though it might be what you call classical music, it can be a funny piece, and it can be lively, it can be a dance, but as long as it focuses on one particular kind of point of view. Now, the other thing that's happening here that I think is worth looking at much more closely, and we will do this with other examples, is the idea of the voice leading, especially the voice leading in the accompaniment. And despite the fact that there's just chords, sometimes it's just pa, pa, instead of pa, pa, the first part is left out, and pa, pa. Right? All of those are connected in a very attractive way, and also they're under the fingers. That is, it's easy to play. It may not be easy to get the right character for this, but it's not hard to play. And there's no reason why your pieces have to be difficult to execute. So I think for the time being that we should stop with this initial presentation, and you'll get a chance, if you wish, to go back and listen to the piece again. There are many fine recordings of this on YouTube, but I thought I would demonstrate just a few things about it before we started to talk about it individually. Now, you will have a score that is on the OL site, and you can download the score. And I think it would be helpful, even during our first meeting, if you could have this printed out in some way, or at least you could have it on your desktop so that you can look at it, and I will be able to have it on my desktop so that you can see some things that I'm pointing out. But especially at this point, I just want to emphasize that I'd like for you to be able to write very clear-cut 4-bar phrases. They don't have to be, double periods like this one, but they do have to be very clear, and that's where, in a way, where the harmony comes in. That helps us to articulate the phrases. So, and we're also going to be talking about how to use some of the more chromatic chords that we have talked about. There's some very interesting things that happen a little bit later on in this piece that I don't expect you to imitate, but we can talk about them once we get sort of in a, or back into a kind of one-on-one situation, which we will have plenty of time to talk about this and to discuss how you might go about doing it. The last thing I want to say too about this is try to make your melodies singable. This is filled with this piece is filled with vocal elaborations. I mean, even this kind of yada, yada, it's almost like the grace note is almost like a glissando or a portamento, a slide. Fa, mi, re, mi, re, do, re, si, re, do. Very easy to sing. La, si, mi, si, so, re, mi, fa, mi, re, fa, mi, re, mi, re, do, re, si, re, do, la, si, re, la, so, mi, so, la. Okay, now I'm singing this like 2 octaves lower, but I'm not a soprano, so perhaps you can find a register that suits you. But whatever you're doing, just make sure that you can really sing the foreground melody that you're writing. That's the key to being able to hear it. And after all, if you can't hear it, it's not going to be much fun to do this. So we will stop for now, and I will